Okay, let's jump right in. First, I'm going to show a template that's very similar to the BBC Orchestra. Actually, the BBC Orchestra template that I made is based off of this one. This one is rather old. I created this about 5 years ago for this project. My company we were working on a game for Game of Thrones, and so they wanted some music that sounded a lot like the television show theme, and so I had to sort of step up the game in Ableton, and using the Contact Library Symphobia 1, the Sound Iron Apocalypse drums on this, as well as some of the default Contact Library orchestral section, the choir and some of their percussion. So right here we have the original TV show theme, and so I've got this here where I can solo it, and I'll do some of that as I'm playing this, just to show you that when you're working on a piece of orchestral music, it's actually nice to lay in a reference track and do some A-B soloing so that you can create a mix or a song that kind of sounds similar. If you're just getting started, it's actually good to try to copy an entire piece, using sample libraries, and that way you can learn, how to actually create a piece of music that way. Unless you read sheet music, of course, there's that method also. But at any rate, I'm going to go ahead and push play and sort of skip through this and kind of show you a little bit what is possible with this sort of template. Okay, without wasting too much time here, just a quick rundown of what's going on and what makes, I guess, this template useful in Ableton. Of course, one of the shortcomings, or I guess features, it's useful in some situations with Ableton, is that MIDI CC data is nested inside of the clips. And so in order to edit that, you've got to sort of drill down, you've got to find the MIDI CC there, and then you edit it per clip. Useful because, of course, you can move the clip around, the CC moves with it. However, when it comes to deadlines and things and trying to get ideas out quickly and iterating a lot of changes, you pretty much have to, it's much faster if you have the CCs kind of right there on the timeline with the clips that you can edit very, very quickly. Also, doing articulation switches, if you've messed with making orchestral music using MIDI notes, typically all the orchestral instruments have like various articulations. For example, with strings, you have like sort of short pluck sounds or staccatos, or you have longer sustained or even legato type articulations. And typically, you have to hit the lower notes on the keyboard to switch those. Well, one of the features of this template is that you will be able to not only edit the CCs on the timeline in front of you with the clips, but also I've created an articulation switcher that you can actually use a MIDI CC knob on your controller to switch the articulations. And I'll show a little bit about that here in a second. Okay, so let's switch over to the Spitfire audio template, and I can just give you a quick rundown of how this works. Of course, you have your video layer, and that's pretty self-explanatory. And you've got the MIDI in note through, and this you're going to link up to whatever keyboard you're going to play your notes on. And you've got your MIDI in, and this is for specifically CC through. You could either link this up to your keyboard if it has MIDI CC knobs on it, or which typically it will with the modulation wheel and pitch bend, or you could always link this up to a separate controller that has all of the MIDI CC stuff on as well. And so basically these two are routing down into the CC in channel here is going into this CC through here. And as you can see, I've got the arrows, which means the CC is going through this and down into this section down in here. Namely, it goes straight through this instrument. And I've got this MIDI effect rack here that splits out the CCs. It's got the CC section here, and then if you click on this button, you'll see there's just like a notes through section. So back to this channel, you can add any kind of like MIDI effects. One thing I really like to use, I'll just give a shout out to this MIDI quantize effect here. It's free, quantize 2.2. It's up on the maxforlive.com site. If you're playing, if you basically can hit any notes and it quantizes them perfectly for you, so it really does help sort of speed things up versus, you know, if you're like me and you're a terrible keyboardist, then you need something like this to lay down notes really cleanly versus having to go back through the MIDI clip after you record it and do a whole lot of cleanup that way. So, and also arpeggiators are really fast if you want to do some ostinato sections. I do recommend exploring this MIDI effect as well, and maybe we'll play with some of that here in a little bit. But let's get back to the meat and potatoes here. We've got, so pretty much to make a channel work here, you want to unmute the CC channel. And then you want to hit the record arm there. And so this basically just sets up this instrument, and it's ready to go. And let's just play some notes. There we go. And I'll ride the mod wheel, and let's. So for the BBC Symphony Orchestra, the mod wheel controls the timbral shifting, and that's pretty much similar for all orchestral libraries. Luckily, they all have stuck to that sort of mod wheel format, and so that means if the mod wheel is down at like 0 and 1, you're going to get sort of the strings playing low, really softly, or if it's all the way up at 1, you're going to get the strings playing really hard, so you'll have a lot more bow sounds, a lot more intense timbres there. And same with brass. You know, when brass instruments are played really loudly, you get a lot more, you know, harmonics and things like that. So with the mod wheel all the way up for brass, that's what you're going to be able to hear some of that come out. With the BBC Symphonic Library, you don't have a full, like, it doesn't go all the way down to 0 volume. So you want to use the CC7 there if you've got one of those control or sliders or knobs on your controller. So you can use that in tandem with CC1 for this particular library. Different contact libraries just behave slightly differently in terms of the dynamic range, and that to me has always been the trick in learning how to make pretty realistic mock-ups, is learning sort of the nuances of your symphonic library. Okay, so let's hit record and just play a few random notes, and I'll sort of show you how that how we can work with it after that. Okay, very emotive sort of string section there. So as you can see, we've got the MIDI CCs right there on the timeline. We'll move around with the clip, very convenient for making changes and edits and iterating, all that, which is really important when you're kind of creating one of these orchestral mock-ups from scratch. You need a lot of flexibility, trust me. And if you're up against a deadline, you need a lot of flexibility to happen quickly. So if you want to just change the notes in there, you can mute this one again. And I'll just call it really quickly. If I hit Control M here, and turn on MIDI map, you can see that I've got CC10 mapped to all of these mutes here. And so basically, you know, if you forget to turn one of these off, you can move whatever MIDI knob or slider and basically shut them all off at once. So if you are down in the percussion section and you're trying to record down there, you can easily turn off all of these and then manually turn that one back on. That will ensure that in case you've accidentally left one of these on up here and you start recording down here, it doesn't overwrite whatever MIDI CC is going on there, if that makes sense. So for example, if I have two of these on and I move the mod wheel, you'll see both on this channel and on this channel the mod wheel is being affected. And sometimes you want that situation. Basically the violins 1 and 2, they oftentimes play together for a fuller type of more realistic sound. And so in that case, you would want to record both of them at the same time, like so. Something like that. If you want to go back and just change the notes, obviously you want to make sure that the CC through is muted. Again, if it's mapped to your slider or whatever, you can just move that a little bit and make them all mute. And let's see. So we want just to change the notes on this one. Let's make sure overdub is off. Otherwise, notes will just be added to an overlay along with the pre-existing ones. So we'll leave that one off there and we'll just hit record and go for it. Hope for the best. Okay, so that gives you a bit of a divisi action there where you've got the two violin sections kind of doing sort of counterpoint type stuff. And if you just want to change, update the CC instead, make sure the record arms are all off and the CC channel that you want to affect is unmuted. So let's go ahead and hit record. So like that. And turn that off. There we go. And so now if we, want to move both of these at the same time or duplicate them, all of the CC data moves with it and is fully editable on the timeline. Very, very convenient. If you've ever done these kinds of orchestral MIDI mockups, that is a big, huge time saver. Okay, one of the features I mentioned at the beginning of this was that we have articulation switching that is exposed here. Right now I've got it mapped to 72. This is a number box. You can change this to whatever. This coincides with a CC knob or slider. On my little Behringer UMX 25, 72 is the most easily accessible to do the switching. So let's go ahead and unmute that, and I'm going to just move around 72, and you can see on the instrument here that it's flipping through the different articulations, which is very useful if you want to switch from a pizzicato and a long. Another way people like to set up the templates are, you'd have violins long, you could have violins, violins 1 long, violins 1 pizzicato. You could have all the articulations on their own. If you have gobs of RAM, you're more than welcome to do that kind of setup. I think it's a little more cumbersome just in that you end up having to scroll down and yeah, it looks like this was on and we recorded some stuff there. So that can ultimately happen. You got to keep an eye out, which is another reason why I like to turn all of these off connected to a CC on my controller. So anyways, back to the articulation switching. You can set this to whatever you want. For example, I also have 75 as another knob that I find really useful. 76, 75. And of course it won't work unless this is unmuted. So, gotcha. And now we can obviously, edit this on the timeline however we want, which is really convenient, I think, versus having to double click in here and drill down and, you know, play with all the note switches down in there. It's a little bit more obnoxious that way. I will say with this sort of setup, you know, you do have to make sure that the key switch happens a little before the actual note. And sometimes I found that you have to actually have it sort of sliding up just a little bit like this. And that it doesn't, that isn't a problem where the CC just jumps like this. It's not a problem for me with Contact. For some reason, it has been an issue with this particular plugin here, this BBC Symphonic Orchestra plugin. So I'm not sure if that's just a bug they've got going on in the plugin, or, you know, something that needs to be refined in the Max for Live patch here. So honestly, these are really crude and rough Max for Live patches. If anybody has any ideas out there how to improve this template overall, make it, you know, easier to iterate on and do things faster with, I am completely all ears and would love to see your ideas and hear your ideas, because, you know, I'm all about, you know, the community, helping the community to build greater and better things to make, you know, our lives easier, make the creation process happen more quickly and be more fun. Okay, so let's see. One other item I should mention is if you want to add tracks, or I guess instruments, pretty much you just want to make sure you select one of these through tracks and you select the instrument below it, because right now they are linked up. And if I duplicate that, then you'll see it's going to take a minute. Okay, and these will stay linked up, and basically all we have to do is swap out this instrument here. So we could, you know, drop in Contact there, and voila, and that's really it. It's super quick and easy. Also, you know, any kind of synths, I do recommend, just a quick shout out to this free version of the VST Pro plugin called Cardinal. It's quite amazing, and I couldn't recommend it more since it's free. There's a ton of modules inside of it, and you can you know, customize it and create your own instruments. We've got some odd 864 modules going on in the latest version, and there's more being added constantly. It's so much fun to play with. You know, if you're doing a sci-fi soundtrack, or even if you need to do some crazy vocals processing, like I've had a lot of robot creatures in some of the games I've worked on. This actually has a lot of sweet built-in granulators and vocoding type stuff. So I highly recommend getting Cardinal Synth. I'll put a link down at the bottom of the video. One thing I should, we jumped over to the other template. Okay, one thing I should mention is there is a pitch effect here, and this is tuned, so the number down here on this switch knob coincides with the actual number of the note. Like 60 is C4, so this is quite low, and -6 is all the way down to the very bottom. So it coincides with these note switches here that for this particular plugin, these low notes trigger these different switches here. Contact instruments have whole different ranges. Some of the Symphobia orchestras I use, the switching occurs up higher. If you drop in Contact or some other plugin like VSL and you need to adjust the range for the switches, you can just kind of move this up and down until these notes coincide with the switching that you need. If you need more than the number of switches that this here provides, you know, feel free to hack in this. You can click on this knob inside of Ableton Live, Control-I, I'm on Windows, and you know, increase the number of steps, and that will give you, I guess, more notes that it will switch to. So you know, that's about all the hacking hopefully you'll have to do. I could probably make a version that would allow this to have, you know, a bit more of a range, but I haven't quite figured out Max for Live well enough to be able to do that much customization, although that would be pretty sweet. I have found this, at least for Symphobia, this is like way more than I need, and most all of the orchestral libraries I've used, this is plenty. I think some of the Spitfire ones do have a lot higher range, but you know, again, it's really, really easy to adjust this particular Max for Live patch for your needs. And I'd love to hear about it. If you do create a version of this that allows you to, increase or decrease the range for the switch, that would be I think pretty useful for the community. Okay, so, I think that this is pretty much all of the major points covered. And I think the rest is just up to you to get out there and use this and create something interesting. I think this is a really great start and an easy jump off point. I've included a sort of rough sketch example inside of the project folder, so feel free to open that and kind of dig around in there. And yeah, and I will say, all of this stuff, pretty light on the RAM, honestly. Like let's see. The Game of Thrones sketch, used under 5 gigs. I'm on a fairly light computer. This is a MacBook Pro 17-inch, 8 gigs of RAM, and so all this goes to show that you really don't need a whole ton of a RAM or a supercomputer essentially to do this kind of work. I will say it's much easier if you can learn how to create multiple songs inside of the same ALS project, if that makes sense. This is just a quick tip that something that I've used a lot, where I will just duplicate out different sections. You can make different variations versus having to close down and reopen the same ALS. I will say this Game of Thrones one that I played in the beginning does take a good almost 5 minutes to load the entirety of all the samples. There's just a lot of moving parts in here. So if you can learn to create all your different versions and variations along the timeline there, and that's ultimately the idea of creating a template in your DAW, is that you can just have everything at your fingertips to quickly access and use in your songs. And so again, it's quite easy to just add new sections. You can just duplicate that section and swap out by just dropping in the instrument like I showed before. And it's really, really super quick and easy, and gives you more bandwidth to actually do the fun stuff versus fidgeting around with trying to reroute things like that. So hopefully I've made it easy for people to get in there and actually do some fun stuff. So I guess in final, get out there, have some fun, make some awesome trailer music, and hopefully get some jobs and make some moolah with this. But at any rate, hope you enjoy, and if you have any questions or ideas for improving this, certainly leave comments, and I'll try to field those questions and hopefully make those improvements myself to this as I see those comments come through. So, all right.